Which programs, which teams are we going to learn the most about Saturday? I'm going to go around the horn here. Let's talk about some games. Some of these we've already previewed and predicted, but what are we going to learn? Let's start with the game we're going to be at. I'm already dressed, properly enough, but Auburn at Penn State. The predictions and whatnot notwithstanding, what are we going to learn about some of these teams? Remember when Malzahn came to Auburn? It was his first year. It was 2013. I think they were coming off like a 4-win season. And they came within seconds of winning a national championship. One of the most out of nowhere, near perfect elbows off the top rope of college football that we've ever seen. Only problem is FSU rolled out of the way, elbow hits the mat, and then boom. FSU hits their finisher. Mr. Benjamin, to be more direct, hits his finisher, and then Florida State wins. But point being, no one thought Auburn had any business doing that. Well, this year, I really wonder, and we'll start to learn a little bit more, because they've looked great so far against borderline air. Not to disrespect opponents, but I am, because Auburn hadn't played anyone. They've done what they're supposed to do. But now we find out if Brian Harsin has any of that Malzahn year one stuff in him, where you're not expecting anything, the preview magazine culture didn't expect anything, and then all of a sudden they do something. Well, if that is to be the case, certainly this would be a very, very opportune place for that to start. Saturday night, everyone's talking about the environment. I do want to reiterate something. Some of you out there love the pageantry, spectacle of college football. Some of you couldn't care less about that stuff. You just like the X's and O's on the field, and you don't care about all this other. Even if you fit into the latter category, I would strongly encourage you be tuned in at, 7:30, I think, Eastern time is when we kick this thing off. Make sure you're tuned in for the beginning of this game. I'm talking about when teams take the field. Because even if you don't really care about the spectacle, you'll probably get caught up in this spectacle. I don't think there's better theatrical elements in college football, maybe until you get to the Rose Bowl in January for a different reason, than you'll see on display in State College, Pennsylvania, Saturday night. Incredible. I've never even been there. I will Saturday night, but I'm telling you about it anyway. So that's part one. Part two, if you start asking what does it take for Auburn to actually win this game, everyone's focused on Bo Nix. Well, I'm not. I'm focused on Tank Bigsby. And I remember being at the Iron Bowl, I think it was in 2015. Yeah. That's when Derrick Henry had one of those games where they handed the ball to him over 40 times, and then he finally put Auburn to bed. That's about the only tailback that we've seen in major college football be utilized in that fashion. I am mentioning Derrick Henry because I wonder if Auburn might not need that kind of performance from Tank Bigsby to win this. I can assure you they're not going to put the ball in the air a whole lot with Bo Nix. In fact, interceptions may not be the biggest issue. Fear of letting him throw the ball because of interception looming in the back of your mind may be the bigger hindrance for Auburn, but all that can be negated if they find out they can move the ball. And then Tank Bigsby starts rolling, and you look up at halftime, and he's already got 23 carries for 119 yards and a touchdown, and you say, he's on pace for what? And then they don't let up in the second half, and they just keep running him and running him and running him. Maybe the kind of performance Auburn needs in order to win the game. Thirdly, how about Penn State taking this game? You know, they won against Wisconsin in week one. The box score tells a different story. Doesn't matter. It's still a check under the W column. But as we get further down the road, you're ultimately going to get anywhere close to where you want to go. You got to be able to take games. And unlike week one, you're not in a hostile environment. You're in a friendly environment. Auburn should feel like they're playing against 12 guys at any given time. Can you take the game that should be yours? Those are some things I'm watching in that one. How about Alabama at Florida? The first thing that I will be focused on with Alabama, and I think we all should be focused on, as that fog of the early season starts to clear, is we start to get a little more context around what we really witnessed Alabama do in week one. You think Miami's a top 20 team, thereabouts, and you watch Alabama make quick work of them, and so you come out of it, as you should have, and you say, wow, Alabama looks borderline unbeatable. Maybe not unbeatable. They look really good. And they did look really good. But the thing about the early season fog is sometimes it really clouds your visibility. And sometimes what you think is a really good team is not a really good team. Well, so now we've got another week of perspective. And that week involved Miami narrowly getting by App State. Suicidal feline in the second deck was the bigger takeaway from that game than the actual game itself. So now we get into week three, and now Bama's got its biggest test of the year so far, and it's in a true road environment. And you take a lot of those kids out on the road, and they get to experience the swamp for the first time. Pretty much, yeah, everyone on that roster does. The overall caliber of the team. Bama could go in there and win 44-13, They could go in there and win 29-23. Those are 2 wins, but, they hit you a little bit different. Just the overall caliber of play. Nothing too specific, just the overall caliber of play. That's one thing. And then I got another thing I was asking Director Colin about probably about 30 minutes ago. I was randomly just writing some notes down, and I said, Colin, I got a thought for you. He goes, oh, not again. I said, yeah, just humor me for a second. Since no one's predicting it, because I have not seen anyone outright predict a Florida win, since no one's predicting it, what if Dan Mullen wins? You ever stop to think about that for a second? What if instead of covering, some people have been bold enough to predict that, what if Dan Mullen and Florida actually win? How radically would that shift the whole dynamic? I'm kind of asking that rhetorically. I'm not quite sure I know the answer to that. I know I'd be ultra impressed, but how impressed would Florida fans be? How shook would Georgia fans be, even though it has nothing to do with them, but you know good and well you would be anyway, because the talk Monday don't wait till Monday. The talk Saturday night by 8 p.m. would be, our guy has beaten Nick Saban. What's your guy done? By the way, our guy beat your guy en route to the SEC East last year. Is anyone looking at Dan Mullen a little bit differently? I think it could come to feel that way if he were to pull that off. Some things to think about there. I think even a good, hearty 31-24 loss would paint a not-so-gloom picture for the rest of the season for Florida. So some things to watch there. Consistency at the quarterback position is what I would really love to see validated for Florida. There is also a game happening in the state of Florida a little bit further south, and that is a noon kickoff Eastern time, and it's Michigan State at Miami. This is a game that in some years in college football would be a marquee matchup. This is not one of them. But then again, you know our philosophy around here. It doesn't have to have massive playoff implications for us to be into it. This could end up being, for a variety of reasons, one of the most entertaining games that you watch all of Saturday. And I'm going to tell you why. Because there are way too many people uttering the following sentence as part of their preview for this game. Michigan State has looked like the better team. Michigan State feels like the better team. Now, if you're a Miami Hurricane fan, you know good and well that has no business being a reality. But yet, if you're a Miami Hurricane fan, you also probably are a little hesitant to strongly push back on that because you've watched your team, and it's been nothing to write home about. And you've probably watched some Michigan State this week leading up to this game, and you've said, good for Mel Tucker. They do look good. They took care of Northwestern. They won again last week, and so here they come. They're going to come down here. Number one, how hostile a home crowd environment can we generate? Number two, have we swept this stadium for feral cats? And number three, they're not better than us, are they? Are they better? No, they can't be. Right, guys? Is Michigan State better than us? It shouldn't even be that close, is the point. So this line is 6, Canes -6. And I'll tell you, I've been over on InsideTheU.com today, but I've also got several Miami buddies that I've just kind of done a little non-scientific polling with. A lot of them think this is a must-win for Manny Diaz. Now, I guess that all comes back to how you define a must-win. Must-win, if you define it as, well, he's going to be fired right after the game if he loses, no, this is not a must-win. But if it's a must-win in order to keep the trajectory of the Miami program this season on any kind of course that you think is acceptable, yeah, it's a must-win. Because if they lose this, you are 1-2. Your 1 wins against an FCS program, or G5 program, not an FCS program, by the skin of your teeth. What are we really talking about here? And that's before you've even entered conference play. And so you're looking at Miami's schedule. If you're watching on YouTube, they have Central Connecticut after this, but then they dive in to conference play. But yet, even with a clean conference slate, think about how weird that would be. If they were to lose this game, you already are asking yourself, to a certain degree, knowing the standard at Miami, what are we playing for? And I'll tell you what else would happen. If they let Michigan State come in there and beat them, you're letting a coach that is much younger in his tenure at a place that should be behind the 8 ball relative to you when it comes to getting talent on campus surpass you, seemingly, in your own building. That's the kind of stuff that makes people start to talk about a lot more than the season. That's the kind of stuff that makes people start to talk about your job. I'm not necessarily into that kind of conversation, but I think it's undeniable if Manny Diaz and Miami were to drop this game, that is naturally where the conversation would flow. So keep an eye on that. Also in the ACC, what about Virginia at North Carolina? If you're honest with yourselves, most of you have not seen North Carolina since week 1 on the road. They lost on that Friday night against Virginia Tech. And so I mean, if you're also being honest with yourself, a lot of you have not watched Virginia yet this year. Virginia is really weird offensively. They do a whole lot of stuff. They don't have 4- and 5-star talent all over the place, but in college football, you can win without it, especially if you're doing something unique. And say nothing else about Virginia, but say this. They are unique. They're a special preparation offensively, so good for Bronco Mendenhall. But also they have that familiar Bronco Mendenhall trademark of being really well coached, disciplined, probably not going to beat themselves, hard to handle on the lines of scrimmage, even though, again, the average star rating may not indicate it. And I mention that because in some ways that describes what they dealt with, they being North Carolina, against Virginia Tech in week 1. And we saw how that turned out. Jay Bateman's defense is going to have to be really disciplined, really sound here, and it's not always something we saw them be able to just exude in week 1, and they are favored. They, again, being North Carolina pronouns, they are favored by 8 at home. It's one of those weird lines. There are several games like that this week. Like we're going to talk about it in just a second, but Purdue at Notre Dame is another one of those games. Michigan State at Miami. All these home teams that were higher favored at the beginning of the year, and they're around a touchdown favorite, but yet you're also saying, yeah, I can see them losing outright. So let's keep an eye on that one, and we can go ahead and roll to the last one, Purdue at Notre Dame. Does anyone out there have the slightest clue about what to expect from Notre Dame this week? There are two widely differing schools of thought on what to expect from the Irish. But before we talk about expectation, what are they right now? We're looking at B-roll, if you're watching on YouTube, of their week 1 game, where it looked like they were going to pull away from Florida State, who you most recently saw fall to the hands of the Gamecocks, and not the ones from South Carolina. It looked like they were pulling away from FSU. Nice little hostile road win, and then all of a sudden they get taken to overtime. In retrospect, that looks horrific. And then in week 2, Toledo. Now, you can make excuses for both of those. You could say, hey, that was a tough place to play, and we sleptwalked a little bit in week 1. And week 2, we were on essentially 48 hours less rest than Toledo. All these things are true. Okay, that's fine. You still look bad. You still look a lot below the standard people expect from Notre Dame. So there's one school of thought that they're just flat out not all that great this year. The other school of thought is this is the spot, if they are to kind of hit a stride, that it would happen. Because now there's no excuse for this week. I mean, they're at home back-to-back weeks, full rest, blah, blah, blah. They even banned Purdue from bringing the big drum into the stadium. Couldn't fit through the visitors' tunnel. And then Purdue said, well, that's cool, but what about your tunnel? And Notre Dame said, nope. We're Catholic, but we're kind of going Church of Christ on you. No instrumental music in here today. I'm a Church of Christ guy, so I know all about it. They're not letting Purdue bring the drum in. Colin, I want to say since 1979, it's the first time Purdue does not get to take that drum on the road. I'm a former drummer. In another life, I was in a band called 85 South. When you take the percussion away, people tend to get violent. You know my proclivity to completely exclude any kind of external motivation tactic. But if I'm Jeff Brom, I so badly need one of those, hey, remember me type of games, because his name hadn't been on any radars for a little while. I'm resorting to anything I have to. And if I can get my locker room fired up because we couldn't bring our cool drum in here, then so be it. But watch out for Purdue, because if the first camp is right about Notre Dame, and there's just not really anything to write home about, Purdue can go in there and win, especially if Notre Dame does not possess the offensive ability to stretch you, and they just kind of have to out-rock fight you for 4 quarters. At that point, you got really, really thin margins. Purdue could win that game, so let's be heads up. Those are just some of the many things. We have a Purdue by 17, Jet. Sometimes I have to prove to you the show's live, so I react to the live chat. Purdue by 17 would be noteworthy, I'll say that.